for another session of Naredco Mahi'S Empowering Knowledge series. Today we will be discussing about future of real estate, various opportunities and challenges. So, first of all, real estate as a sector plays a very important role in our overall economy. It has been a substantial contributor to the national GDP, contributing to 7.3% of GDP at present, and it is projected to increase to 13% by 2026, which is huge. Key factors that led to the evolution of Indian real estate sector over the last decades are rapid urbanization, increasing disposable income, liberal credit policies, allowances of FDI to the extent of 100% in the sector, reforms and stimulus, etc. All these factors have impacted the sector not only in the form of increasing the number of launches and sales, but also in terms of evolving buyers' behavior, improved affordability, and the extension of market presence from metropolitans to tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I think, if we go back 5 years, 6 years, or even before COVID, I don't think, there was so much of development which we are seeing today in tier 2, tier 3 cities. The bigger developers who are getting into tier 2, tier 3 cities was completely not possible. So I think, there's a lot of development, a lot of growth which is happening in these cities also, which was much required. And because of the transformations or the changes or support from the government which is coming in, because of which all these things are becoming possible now. But there are also challenges in the sectors that we've been facing. The Indian property market faces several challenges that impacts its growth and efficiency. These include workforce shortages, labor issues, and other issues that we're talking about, escalating construction costs. People talk about affordable housing, but do you really think with the kind of cost that we have today, affordable housing is a possible option? Most of the developers who were actively doing affordable housing in the past have closed it or have reduced that part just because the affordability factor is not there. And apart from that, there has also been other challenges like land acquisition issues, complexity, stringent regulations from RERA, financing constraints, and increasing sustainability requirements. So these are some of the challenges which we will be discussing during our discussions there. But there are future trends where the government has already been working on, and there are already some positive lights that we are seeing in the sector, like when you're talking about future urbanization trends or shift towards organized retail, sustainability and energy efficiency. There are a lot of net zero buildings and everything that people have started working on right now. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana that we're talking about. So with all this, I think, I feel the sector has a lot of growth opportunities which can be explored. And, the sector will really boom with all these opportunities that's going to come on. So with this context, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our eminent speaker, Mr. Pavaman V. Jainapur. So it's like, I think if I start introducing him, it'll take a complete day for us to introduce all his credentials. So I will just shortly like to introduce him today. He brings a robust blend of academic excellence and hands-on experience in civil project management. With over 24 years of extensive experience in managing a variety of projects, both domestically and internationally. Mr. Pavaman's project portfolio ranges from a medium to large scale undertakings, with project values spanning from 3.6 million to 1,250 million. Wow. Pavaman has honored his expertise in construction project management, cost optimization, value engineering, and contract management. He has worked with leading corporates such as Hindustan Construction Company Limited and has also contributed as an academic council member and a visiting faculty at prestigious institutions in Pune. In his current role, he is associated with Sabre Learning Experts. Sabre Learning Expert is an agile and innovative company specializing in high-value trainings for construction and real estate sector. With a team of over 25 experienced faculty members, they offer diverse technical and behavioral courses tailored to skill levels. They are on a mission to empower professionals and organizations with competency based learning that drives real results. They have a successfully trained 50 plus leading real estate builders and PMCs delivering practical solutions that meet evolving industry needs. I think that's a commendable job which the organization is doing today because for me, real estate and infrastructure are two sectors, which are still little unorganized. And if you have people like Pavman sir and organizations like Sabre who can contribute to adding, more trainings and learnings to these sectors, I think that is what is required to take the sector to the next level. Welcome, Pavman sir. We look forward to an insightful discussion with you.
Thank you, Sonalji. Thank you for the introduction and having me here. I look forward to.
The pleasure is ours, sir. So probably, I'll just start with one-on-one questions with you without wasting further time on this, so that, we
Sure,
would like to have more of your experience and understanding about the sector.
sure,
So,
certainly.
sir, my first question here will be, how has the real estate sector changed over the last decade, and what has been the key learnings? Matlab, last decade, if you're talking about, has seen a lot of ups and downs, especially, with COVID coming in last 5, 6 years. So, what has been, the real changes that has been in the last decade, and what has been the key learnings from this sector?
Sure. As we have seen in all, rather almost all of the segments, the last decade has actually seen a lot of growth, has seen a lot of scaling up, has seen a lot of uncertainties as well, and so is the case of the real estate. Now, in order to make this more meaningful and more appealing to the common, to a common man who would be perhaps on listening to us on this webinar, let me just go a little back. Let's say something like around 1980s, with
Hmm.
with perhaps an an analogy, saying that if I may have to compare the real estate currently with what it was earlier, I may perhaps want to describe that best with an example of an automobile industry. Like, say, during the 1980s, what was more prevailing were actually two brands. One of
Hmm.
them was the Ambassador, and the other one was Fiat. So, if it was any government organization, it
Hmm.
was normally onto the Ambassador, and it was if it was any private entity, he would be onto a Fiat. Now,
Theatre.
that private entity involved a common man as well as taxis all across in Bombay and other areas, right? Now, if you take that as the base versus if you compare the automobile industry today, you've
Hmm.
seen a phenomenal growth. Phenomenal growth in terms of number of brands, number of models, number of variants, and so on and so forth. So I think this can be a best analogy, according to me, to compare the real estate segment as well. Going back, let's say, of course, real estate or home front remains as catering to one of the most basic needs as roti kapda or makan.
Hmm.
Now,
True.
the earlier 1980s, if you see, predominantly would be having about four verticals.
Hmm.
Obviously, residential, there would be commercial, of
Hmm.
course, in its most primitive form, that could be perhaps existing without the gaga of glass facade buildings and so on and so forth, normal commercial buildings meant for business purpose. Perhaps third you would have is, let's say, institutional buildings, which meant government offices, schools, colleges, hospitals, etc. And perhaps last would be, let's say, something like hospitals. Now,
Right.
over the years, what has happened is, the way I look at it is, real estate has grown multifold with new entries like warehousing. Okay, warehousing, which was perhaps that time only government controlled, very
Hmm.
limited, things like that. Today, with the opening up of the private segment, you have private warehouses, you have perhaps private freight terminals, which is coming in today in
Right.
the railway segment. In the hospitality industry, there are the model has got complicated where you have perhaps real estate companies as the owners, you have third party specialty hotel operators, and so on and so forth, right? Even in schools, even in international schools for that matter. Now the chains of schools that you see. So you have somebody who has constructed the premises as the real estate owner, and he hands it over to any of the multinational chains of schools, and they operate the school. So over the years, what has happened is this model of generating or constructing one premise and operating has changed. Along with it, what has also changed is, let's say earlier, a typical building, of course, I'm leaving the stone buildings, the old vadas, which you actually call, right?
Right.
The the stone masonry buildings, which have all become heritage buildings now. Let me keep them aside. Starting from the concrete ones, the concrete buildings, perhaps earlier all that we would see is an RCC Bandhkam plaster, brickwork plaster with pockets for windows. That
Hmm.
typically was the elevation of buildings. Now, if you see, you have glass facades, you have aluminum composite panels, you have perhaps variety of pins using glass reinforced concrete, fiber reinforced concrete, and whatnot. So basically, even if you see the way in which buildings are constructed, today has undergone a phenomenal change. You rightly touched base on aspects like net zero. So starting from the very basics, let's say earlier, something like 1980s, 1990s, you had typically an architect, a structural consultant, perhaps a services consultant like electrical, plumbing, and firefighting. Maybe
Right.
somebody would have added HVAC.
Hmm.
Now, today, if you see the amount of consultants lists that we have, let's look at the complications and let's look at the diversity. Earlier, one architect used to do the entire job.
Hmm.
Now, you have a design architect who is separate, perhaps a master planner who is separate,
Be
typically
separate.
from
Right.
abroad, right? Then you may have a licensing local architect who is more involved with the statutory permissions and so on and so forth. Apart from all the normal consultants that I just spoke about, you may have a sustainability consultant, you may have an environmental consultant, you may have a traffic consultant, you may have a BMS consultant, BMS meaning building management systems. So the technology where one person like us sits in front of a laptop and he is able to control one full building in terms of its security, in terms of monitoring the CCTVs, in terms of keeping the checks on the
That's
energy utility,
diversified now. Hmm.
correct, on so on and so forth, right? And again, that can further be enhanced to whether the person is just viewing or he is controlling as well.
Hmm.
So, in simple words, what I'm trying to come to is that today's buildings have become very complex, and as we move ahead, the
Hmm.
complexity is only going to increase, and the entire design is obviously will have to cater to the aspects that this building becomes more functionable.
Hmm.
Gone are those days where a building could look great but become a power guzzler, right?
Hmm.
So in all those aspects today, you need to completely think from a project perspective of from concept to completion and even operation as well. So that is where the concepts of net zero, as you rightly highlighted, and all these aspects come into picture. Having said that, what is equally important is, again, you mentioned the right point saying that civil as an industry is ever evolving. Unfortunately, we still are very unorganized and still cannot be called as an industry per se. Okay, the
That's
moment
a
I
major
say
challenge with the sector. Right.
correct, correct. So the moment I say a manufacturing segment, and
Hmm.
I happen to mention to you about, let's say, the automobiles. So since I've had some intervention in the manufacturing segment as well, where we were training some time back, the moment, let's say, you put across a car model number, its lot number in terms of the production cycle, at a click of a button, you will get the entire detail as to maybe the wipers were taken from whom, who was the vendor,
Hmm.
what was the date of
Hmm.
procurement, and so on and so forth.
Right.
entire inventory is available at the click of a mouse. That's the manufacturing segment. Of course, the advantage being that you are working in a controlled environment. You are
Hmm.
working with typical blue-collar jobs who are repeatedly doing the same thing in the same premises in the same way, right?
So that's
So,
more like a process flow for them. तो वहां
correct.
पे ये चीजें पॉसिबल हो सकती हैं, राइट?
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल. Now, I think even when we look at the civil industry, and see, in any segment, you would need somebody to benchmark to, right?
Hmm.
Because that is where you will come to know that, okay, this is supposed to be the ideal scenario and this is where the industry is. So we've got to bridge this gap. That only becomes more appealable. So I would like to use the manufacturing segment as a benchmark and say that against the manufacturing segment, the factors that stand to be at odds with the civil industry is that firstly, we are unorganized. Secondly, we have a workforce which is continuously churning out. Okay, you
Main issue.
give a guarantee. Yeah, you cannot give a guarantee that the mason who has plastered on the first floor will be the same person who has plastered on the sixth floor in the same building, and so on and so forth. Uh, Actually, even construction as a system is a process. But what is making it challenging is that there are too many uncertainties associated with it, which perhaps, and of course, the skill set gap all
Hmm.
put together are making this model slightly complicated when we compare it to the manufacturing segment. But having said that, again, benchmarking with the manufacturing segment per se, I would say perhaps the best in the industry, if we look at, is in manufacturing, I could mention as the Toyota way
Hmm.
in automobiles, where they have standardized everything, right? In fact, I had heard from somebody that so much is the standardization that if a person is supposed to walk down the steps, there is an SOP which says that he needs to hold the railing. And if he does
Okay.
not do that, okay,
Right.
and I'd heard this in the Toyota manufacturing unit in Bangalore. So we did
Hmm.
not go as far as Japan as well. From one of my friends I had heard of. So if somebody is found to get down the steps without holding the railing, he is requested to go back, start from
Okay.
the top, and again hold the railing. Okay. Now that is the level of standardization. Of course, we need to understand and appreciate that standardizations can't happen overnight. There is a
Huh,
lot
so
of
that's why
discipline.
it has to come into the process, and
Correct.
that process generally takes time.
Correct. It takes a lot of time. And
Yeah.
especially when you have first, you see, the steps would be you have first standardized the process, then you
Hmm.
are inducting people into it, and then you are generating the process, and then you are implementing the process so that it is followed by everyone.
True that.
Now, when I compare this segment with the civil industry, each project is different. Perhaps if I look at some element like shuttering, where you put the formwork to pour concrete into it so that it takes the shape as the building is supposed to be.
Hmm.
Now, given the technological challenges that we have, or technological upgradations that we have, today there
Hmm.
are n number of options available on formworks. So you have one building which has multiple options in formwork, which has multiple options in interiors, which has
Hmm.
multiple options in flooring, which has multiple options in services, say HVAC and what have you, right? So first and foremost, standardizing it or even getting it close to standardization for one building itself is a task.
Hmm.
After having it done, then implementing it onto the construction workers or the project team is the second task.
Is a second task because just that probably we don't have that kind of examples right now where we can talk about that.
Yeah,
So I had recently interacted with another company, which these guys are into net zero. So उन लोगों ने एक boots impacts के नाम से एक company है. I had a recent interaction with them where they are working on net zero buildings completely that we're talking about today. They've done one project in Jhansi. I think Jhansi में उन्होंने एक library का काम किया हुआ है. They're doing another one in Rewari where they're doing the warehouse. So there are a lot of challenges, which they
yeah,
say we've been facing because हमारे पास कोई benchmark नहीं है कि किसी ने
yes,
पहले काम किया हुआ है. So when you're talking about construction perspective, when you're talking about compliances, when you're talking about certification. So बहुत सारे issues हैं अभी which needs to be addressed across.
Correct. Correct. So all of these things are actually posing a challenge to the real estate segment right now. And what
Hmm.
is happening is the moment, I recall a beautiful song, which was Musafir Hai Yaro, Musafir Hu Yaro, sorry. So there it says, मैं मुड़ा तो साथ साथ राह मुड़ गई. I
Hmm.
think that is very much relevant because by the time you start getting aligned to a new direction, there are certain upgradations and advancements that have happened in the industry, which further makes you deviate. As
Deviate
a
from
result,
that.
correct.
Right.
As a result, it's making it very, very challenging and growing to the extent of each and every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, sir, very well quoted on those bases. I think a lot of developments which the sector has seen in last 10 years. And I think this is the only sector which has grown or, the prices have increased even during or post-COVID as well. And certain developments which we have started seeing, like you were also mentioning about, are happening. But implementation, like you mentioned, कि ठीक है हम लोग इम्प्लीमेंटेशन पे फोकस करना जरूरी है क्योंकि बहुत बार ऐसे होता है हम कुछ काम शुरू करते हैं बाय द टाइम वी ट्राई एंड इम्प्लीमेंट दैट द टेक्नोलॉजी चेंजेस सो
Correct.
all
Correct.
these things play a major role when you're talking about a project and especially coming back from you where you're working so much on the project management side so I'm sure you will understand the pain better कि ठीक है हम लोग कुछ इम्प्लीमेंट करना शुरू करते हैं जब तक हम आधे रास्ते पहुंचते हैं तब तक वो टेक्नोलॉजी चेंज हो जाती है
Correct. 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 True.
ग्रेट सो सर दिस टेक्स मी a little to the second question that I have. Could you walk us through each critical stage of a real estate project, highlighting the unique challenges that a developer faced at each step? लैंड
Sure.
की स्टेज पे अलग challenges हैं, लाइसेंसेस की स्टेज पे अलग challenges हैं, कंस्ट्रक्शन की स्टेज पे अलग challenges हैं. So what are the various challenges at each stage as per you from the developer's perspective?
Sure. So I would like to put it this way. Say any project that if you take, standardizing across all sectors, from a project management life cycle point of view, there are basically four stages. First,
Hmm.
obviously, is the conceptualization, which is very, very basic. That is the time
Right.
where that's the first stage, a very preliminary and the initial stage of the project.
Hmm.
Second would be the design and development, where actually you start articulating and finalizing the exact design and the specifics.
Hmm.
Third would be execution, where you are actually construction. I mean, if I'm talking about in civil terms, you are physically constructing at site.
Hmm.
And fourth would be commissioning and handover. So let's say if you have a
Most
commercial
critical,
building,
the most
correct,
critical
you are
stage.
starting all the services, you are ensuring that all
Hmm.
of the outlets are working for the AC and your water flow is fine and as per the pressures that are required and so on and so forth. You may want to add one or two intermediaries like a feasibility and a tendering stage, but these are typically activities. So normally from a milestone basis, they are categorized as four. Now, as you rightly said, one of the good things that have happened in the recent, say, decade or a little more would be that earlier land titles was
Hmm.
a big mess.
Hmm. True.
So today, a lot of standardization has happened based on a lot of things getting on the web and so on and so forth. As a result to that level of uncertainty, things have largely reduced.
Hmm.
We've seen cases where there were multiple titles on the same land piece and so on and so forth. So starting from that, I would say from a conceptualization perspective, today, of course, the more opportunities, the more possibilities, decision making many a times is a complex process. The simplest example is when we walk into any store in the mall.
Right.
Earlier, making choices was so simple. I mean, you had five or six options, you would pick one and you would
Pick up
leave.
one. Right.
Correct. So I think that same issue will does exist for the conceptualization point as well, and that is where I think the branded ones, the good brand ones, those who are long into the segment will have a better advantage in terms of the industry and segment behavior and the pulse. So any of those who are, let's say, at a local level, perhaps may have some. some hiccups here and there by the time they actually have the numbers in place and they start conceptualizing. Now, when it comes to design, okay, the challenges that could come across in the segment is, let's say if you are having a foreign-based architect or a
Right.
foreign-based master planner,
Hmm.
then perhaps many of the times the choice of materials, the use of materials, the longevity of materials, the life of materials, etc., and the cost, of course, the cost and let's say the workmanship aspects. So the choice of all of this and putting a right project plan in place, I think that is one of the most critical aspects. And that is where most of the things, I mean, it's like saying there's a wonderful a proverb or a saying that goes that if you want to cut a tree in 10 hours, you need to first sharpen the axe for the first 7 hours. And that is perhaps done by most of the corporates,
That's the base.
especially
Right. Yeah.
correct, especially Japanese people and so on. But we
Hmm.
still many a times believe in walk the talk, चालू चालू करो, काम चालू करो, साथों साथ
हाँ,
चीजें करेंगे.
लैंड ले
We've
लिया,
also done that.
लाइसेंस आ जाएगा, काम चालू करो, बाद में देखेंगे कैसे
Correct,
करना है. हाँ.
correct, correct. We've also done such projects, and thankfully, I would say we've done those in cases where there was no option,
Hmm.
and the success was attributable to the whole team, which was
Hmm.
matured enough to understand the dynamics.
Hmm.
So if that happens, you might as well do it. But in the absence of such a maturity and such a system, this can equally be a disaster because it's like you are trying to control an amoeba. I mean,
Hmm.
that the sentence itself is contradictory, right? You
Hmm.
can't control an amoeba. The moment you start holding it from this side, it will expand in some other way, and that is
Absolutely.
how the whole project would create a lot of doldrums in terms of execution. So that is where I would say the aspects related to planning
Hmm.
and making a workable plan. Many a times, even today, when I see plans in the industry, perhaps at a very, see, it's like a planning is supposed to be like a funnel process.
Hmm.
Okay, you start seeing only that how much is visible. If on day zero you are trying to address very specifics which are supposed to happen after 6 months or 7 months,
After 6 months or at the time of completion, that will complicate
correct,
a thing. Hmm.
correct, that will be too complicated. And then if you made a wrong benchmark, then every time you are shifting back to that benchmark when you are trying to perhaps trying to gauge where you stand, then the
Hmm.
whole thing is the whole purpose is defeated. So I would equally like to stress the importance of a matured plan, a
Hmm.
matured project plan, which should be good enough to give you a right of way, which tells you that, okay, this is what you can, this is the
Detail.
extent that you can
Hmm.
deviate. At
Hmm.
the same time, give you a flexibility to perhaps include all the uncertainties that are coming the way without affecting the end delivery.
Hmm.
So that is a
That's
huge
critical.
challenge.
Very
Yeah.
critical. Right.
End delivery it should remain the same. Okay.
Hmm.
And I mean, best examples I would say are the schedules of trains mostly. There is a
Hmm.
small amount of buffer given to them, 10,
Hmm.
15 minutes here and there. If
Hmm.
they are delayed at one station, the next station they will make up and they will come back on track. Correct.
Hmm.
It can't be that if you are 5 minutes delayed somewhere, the whole thing gets dragged by 5 minutes. That should not be the case.
True.
And honestly, when we are talking about streamlining construction projects, the another example that I usually give is like, we are trying to shift from driving a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler towards driving a train. There
Hmm.
are two different aspects. So two-wheeler is very easy. You can do lane cutting anytime. Four-wheeler is a little, there is a little bit of a constraint, but then you can still go from one lane to the other and come back. But if you need to drive a train, which talks about maturity of a system, there is a good system and process that needs to
Hmm.
come in place. You can't accelerate and brake every next second in the opposite way.
I think here another, sorry to bother, here another example will be people doing affordable suddenly goes into doing large projects where they don't
Correct,
understand the complexities of a larger
correct,
project. They don't
correct,
understand the market of a larger project. Or
correct.
people doing residential, getting into hospitality, getting into commercials. So till the time you have a player who has been a part, who becomes your partner, who has an experience into that segment, I think it's going to be little tough for these guys to change a product completely.
Very true. Very true. You just made a very apt point.
Hmm.
So, referring to this hospitality segment, which we discussed in the initial portion, see, earlier perhaps you had local brands. Today, people have tie-ups with perhaps
International,
maybe Starwoods,
right?
yeah, Le Meridian, and
Hmm.
what have you, St. Regis, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, the whole planning when it starts with a certain datum in place. And then obviously everybody is trying to find their way to realize all of those standards which are getting implemented. And unless somebody really understands this, okay, for them, again, unfortunately or fortunately, I would say this unfortunately or fortunately because residential or a real estate game is actually, I would say, a 50-50 ratio of commercials and technical,
Hmm.
which is why you would find that majority of the builders even today are mostly from commerce backgrounds, right? And rightly so. I mean, there are equal challenges with respect to finance as well.
Hmm.
So in this segment, where perhaps the understanding or over the years, it's like okay, unless it's a major disaster, something can always be changed. That's the common person's understanding when it comes to real estate segment.
True.
But perhaps the challenge lies in at what level of changes you are getting. If you
Hmm.
are getting changes at the level of construction, if you are getting changes in design at the level of, let's say, 30-40% of project execution,
Hmm.
then it means a huge turbulence, which is there in the entire project organization, ripples to the extent of affecting the cost, affecting reworks, thereby quality,
Lot of it.
affecting safety.
Lot of it. So I
Correct.
have seen some clear examples, where a hotel owner is doing a project himself. Suddenly, after the project is 70 to 80% completed, he realizes, that probably I need a brand to run the
Yeah.
project because I
Correct.
am a developer. I don't know how to
Correct.
run a project. So he suddenly wants a brand to come. And the moment
Correct.
brand comes in, they have their
Correct.
own checklist of the
Correct.
things to be done, the parameters to be taken care to take care of the
Correct.
quality and stuff, and that changes the whole cost of the project. So
Correct.
probably जो प्रोजेक्ट वो लोग 100 करोड़ 150 करोड़ में बनाने का प्लान कर रहे थे, suddenly the cost shoots up to 250 300 crores, and
Correct.
there the project goes for a toss where these guys had some cost of the project in mind, and when that suddenly
Yes.
shoots up, so managing that cost of the project and maintaining a break even after 2 years,
Yes.
3 years, 4 years of the tenure of the project also after completing the
Yes.
project becomes very complicated for them. I've
Yes.
seen some live 2 3 examples where the projects
Correct.
have gone for a stress just for the reason that the developer or the project operator who comes in is coming in at a later stage of the project, and he is paying the whole cost of the project there.
Absolutely right. On this note, I would just like to share one example which I had perhaps in the very initial years of my career in project management.
Hmm.
I was working for MNC. Let me not name the company for confidentiality purpose. But basically, such were their systems that the project head was a 55-year-old general manager of that company. Okay, very,
Right.
very senior person. We were doing that time, it was way back in 2005. We were doing a project, I think it was, if I remember right, it was about 1 CR that time.
Hmm.
And after the designs were made, all discussions, tendering, etc. happened. Due to whatever reasons, we understood that, okay, there have been certain upgrades in specs, which has led to a cost increase of 5 lakh rupees.
Hmm.
Okay, 5 lakhs in 1 crore budget.
Hmm.
Now, I was surprised. I was very, very new in all this. Uh, I was just observing and things like that. So that time I was shocked that, the person, the general manager, he put the project on hold for a month
Hmm.
for 5 lakhs. He went to the board abroad. We lost about 1.5 months by the time the approvals came in.
Hmm.
But the advantage was once we got the approval and we began the construction process, there was
Right.
no question mark in the project team's mind at all, including the contractor.
Hmm.
So
Which
he
was
knew that
important.
whatever, correct,
Hmm.
he knew that whatever bills were put in, those were passed within a week's time after all the due checks. Okay. So in short, his comfort in working for capital management and so on was done. And such was the leadership that time that after the project was commissioned, we carried out value engineering processes at various stages, and the project was done with a 5% saving.
Hmm.
So this was the first project in project management which was so properly and which has been so
Implemented
properly
because it
ingrained.
was planned and implemented well.
Yes, and that is where we understand and appreciate the aspects of delivering in today's scenario, which is very very challenging, and this can be driven only through teams, through set teams, through set systems, and perhaps trainings. These three are the backbone in order to leverage onto whichever real estate or whichever construction industry
Startup
segment
you
that
come.
you may be in.
Oh, great. Wonderful, sir. So this takes me to my next question. Given the current skill gaps that we've been discussing in the real estate sector, how important is continuous training and what measures is the industry taking to ensure teams stay updated with the latest industry standards and technology? मतलब ठीक है,
Yeah.
बहुत सारे standards, बहुत सारी technologies introduce हो रही हैं, but how are we ensuring that our teams are updated on that? And what are the main roles which probably training plays today?
Yeah. So, since civil as an industry itself is unorganized, so are all activities related to it, including trainings.
Hmm.
Now, even when we are interacting in the industry, we find that many a times the challenges are in defining the learning objectives, because the format what we believe is any training has to be well customized to the requirements.
Absolutely.
Now, otherwise, otherwise, then obviously it needs to be measurable. It needs
Hmm.
to, we need to have a KRAPI, a key result area, and a performance indicator attached to it, so that at the end of the training, we need to understand what is it that we actually achieved through the training process.
Hmm.
Now, the challenges in this is when we, let's say, when we look at any particular business house and any particular project, as you rightly said, if an industry or if a company is doing a residential building and a commercial building and a hospitality building, the know-how and the skill set of each of these buildings are different, of course. So even in commercial, if you are using things like, let's say, Italian marble in terms of flooring and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
the entire cost dynamics of the project change. So also its entire procurement cycle in terms of, because the challenge in the real estate segment is most of the time the selling prices are determined by the market and they are frozen. So if you
True.
have your systems and processes which are best or at par, you are going to land up making a better profit margin. That is the bottom line. And if you don't, if you land up making a lot of wastages, no client is going to pay you anything extra.
Hmm.
So the whole game of real estate is how you are able to leverage on that margin through your systems and processes. Now, coming back to these trainings, what is more important is uh, how, what exactly is your learning objective? What is, again, one of the other challenges that I want to mention here is this is a part of, adult learning program. Now, we as adults have a unique method of learning things. And
True.
today, this, I think if I may remember right, starting 2005 onwards, the concept of learn, unlearn, and relearn came into picture. It has only aggravated now, if and it's not something which is very new to us, right?
Hmm.
So, in this aspect, on the training fronts, firstly, having a core group who are doing that work is very, very important. Many a times we come across companies who say that, okay, we have about 15 people They will attend the training programs. So that is where we tell them that, look, if you are making anybody and everybody sit for, I mean, of course, they are welcome. There's nothing that it should not be. But then if you are making people sit for sessions which are not of their work domain,
Interest. Hmm.
and work domain, forget interest also. I mean, if the person is interested, he will
Work
contribute
domain.
somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
But if he's not something,
Hmm.
if he's not doing something on a day-to-day basis, and if you are empowering him to do that, if it's a
Hmm.
part of longer vision, appreciate it. But if you are just doing that because some you need to show some training programs, which unfortunately is the reality on the ground, then perhaps the whole purpose is defeated. So what we tell them and what we try to hold them is, firstly, you need to have your target audience which is fixed. Then we need to have a learning objective. Once the learning objective is done, we will have a module which is designed for that. We need to
Hmm.
have one or two iterations between, so that between the top management and the trainer who is delivering the program, we need to be aligned completely. Once that is
That's
done,
very important.
correct.
Absolutely.
Once
The
that is done,
objective which needs to be achieved out of this program can be done only once you have the set people who get
correct,
impacted by it. Right.
correct, correct. Then that is the stage where we do the program. Once we do the program, okay, many of the companies stop at the program,
Hmm.
wherein the main crux starts after the program has been delivered, which is the follow-up. So whatever whatever new skill sets have been introduced to the target audience during the session, there is supposedly a handholding which is required for them on the field.
Hmm.
That is where the cycle gets completed. And once you do that, then that becomes measurable. And then that is the time where you can say that, yes, you have actually delivered and realized what were the objectives.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, again, I would like to mention here is some time back, I was associated with a different training firm for a manufacturing segment. We had the point is we carry that ideology, which is why I feel it worth mentioning here. Is we had done about, if I remember right, 12 training programs all across the country.
Hmm.
The modules were fixed, the content was fixed, they were translated to a local person, I mean, in the local language to the local
Okay.
audience.
Okay.
They were conducted simultaneously all across. Okay. So the firm's vision was, whatever is the training which is being imparted, that has to be the same across the country in a
Hmm.
language that my person will understand, because we were dealing with middle to grassroots level
Which is
teams.
important, right? When you go deep
Correct.
dive and understand the end requirement.
Correct.
Right.
So having seen all this, and obviously seeing the current market scenario, of course, there are huge gaps even in the training industry. There
Hmm.
are many innovations, many new products, new technologies, etc., ever evolving, and all of these have to be completed in time, cost, quality parameters, including safety. So
Hmm.
chances, I mean, chances of taking a chance are very minimal, with too many adverse implications. God forbid if something does go wrong. So in all this scenario, I think we as an organization, I mean, we as a industry, while we are evolving, training in its need is equally evolving as well.
Hmm. No, absolutely. And just to add on to this question, Pavan sir, what are the various trainings or what are the important trainings you think are required in this sector right now, which, a leadership team should take it up for themselves also and for their team as well. So some suggestions on those basis.
Sure. So, if I may divide, as you rightly said, if I may divide into two parts. First is
Hmm.
obviously the senior and the top management level, and second obviously is the site management level.
Hmm.
I'll first come to the site management, which is relatively easier to understand but quite tough to implement. Then we'll go to the management, because they're both are complicated.
Right.
So when it comes
Very
to
true.
construction management, yeah, when it comes to construction management, of course, the person at site these days, see, let's again start from the very earlier days. We've seen buildings stand where they were actually constructed by a skilled foreman.
Hmm.
That was a time where you had engineers who would visit two or three sites. They would not be on a site full-time basis. That was the era somewhere about 95, 1985, and so on and so forth. Today is the time where you definitely have minimum three engineers on every building, whichever building you are doing. Why is this so? Because basically, of course, you have aspects related to execution. Of course, you
Hmm.
have technologies. Of course, you need to have variety of checklists and documentation, which is a part of the game. But when it comes to things like, let's say, sustainability, uh, let's say, adhering to all conditions that have been provided in a statutory permission, and so on
Hmm.
and so forth. At the same time, this site person is also coordinating with various consultants who are at diverse locations, perhaps even abroad, at this point of time.
That's
So,
important, right?
correct. So
Coordination
this
with them.
person, right. So the role that a site engineer is playing today is perhaps like a plug-in, plug-out concept of an
Hmm.
electrical switch. You know, he is plugging in a right consultant at the right time, seeking his inputs, perhaps even through mail exchanges, WhatsApp. All of these are amazing technologies which are helping decision making very fast. Or a VC today, cross-border presence is no longer a reason for delay of decisions. So,
Technology is that available
correct.
now. Yeah,
Technology is available, internet broadband speeds are amazing, clarity
100%.
is amazing. I mean, the best example is what we are doing it right now with the amount of clarity that we have, and so on
Right.
and so forth. So, having said that, basically at the site level, I think I would call it as construction management because they are relating to very specific activity of construction,
Hmm.
understanding the processes, understanding the dependencies, most importantly, and integration and coordination, at the same time communication. I think
Hmm.
these three things are the pillars for guys at this level. It is important when, what, and how you communicate. At the same time, if you are right in that, then you are able to integrate and collaborate. That is
Hmm.
coordinate.
Hmm.
So all aspects related to, I would say, to as small as communication maybe, which many a times we just take it very lightly. Professional communication is a skill. Unfortunately, not everybody possesses that. So that is one definitely an area which needs
I
to be
think
looked
that
at.
is must required at a leadership level because
Correct.
it has to flow from there. When you're talking about communication, unless and until it clearly flows from the leadership level, niche impact padta nahi.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so while your site engineer today is much more accountable and responsible, he is
Hmm.
responsible for the safety of the site, he is responsible for the progress of the site, he is responsible for perhaps many a times the quality of the site, and then
Hmm.
he is also responsible for integrating various consultants at the right time, and so on and so forth. So and in order in addition to that, I would say aspects like value engineering, where he is able to save money
Hmm.
for his company uh, using the right alternatives. Now, value engineering can
Cost.
many times
Hmm.
be miscommunicated with cost
Right.
thinking.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so those are two different things. Value engineering is keeping the same specifications. How can you bring down the value? Whereas
Values. Hmm.
under cost control or cost optimization or whatever, ideally the right word is cost control. Under cost reduction, what you're trying to do is you are trying to play around and degrade the specifications, thereby you are degrading the experience in the end.
Hmm.
So contracts management is one very key aspect which the person at site needs to understand. Gone are those days where somebody could bully over the other. If the amount of documentation, if the details of the project are not maintained, God forbid if a project goes into arbitration,
Hmm.
and these guys are, an arbitration is as good as a advocate, a lawyer. So, he will ask entire documentation of the project, and that is the basis for him to give his judgment, the arbitral judgment.
हाँ
So,
मतलब वो सब मेंटेन्ड होना जरूरी है.
correct. Maintaining what documents and how effectively. I think all these are very basic skill sets, depending on the organization
Hmm.
and its maturity of systems. normally customizing these trainings will become very, very important for them. Okay, because it's about one small step at a time in the right direction. Now, if we have to move, okay, safety, of course, I mentioned the aspects related to safety are equally paramount
Hmm.
importance as well. Now, if I have to go from the site management to the top and the senior management, one analogy which I would like to give here again is I think that makes correlation very easier. So I would want to say that if you have ever traveled recently in a Vande Bharat, okay,
Hmm.
see, and if you just take a little bit of time, I experienced that, so I'm sharing that. Perhaps it may help anyone of y'all as well. So if you just perhaps sit across calmly on the seat and no thoughts, just as good as a meditation aspect, you would find that a lot of things are happening at the rail level or the wheel levels. Okay,
Hmm.
the train is shifting across from this track to that track, and there are
That's
transitions and
the
brakings and so on
flow.
and so forth.
The flow is set. Right.
Correct. However, at your level, when you are sitting on on the grade level, there you will find that the experience is calm and beautiful.
Hmm.
So what is happening is between this calmness and between this lot of activity level of variety of things happening, there is a cushion layer, which
Hmm.
we call it as a shock absorber. Now that I think the role of a top management or a senior management, depending on the hierarchy and the spread of the organization, the skill set is how this senior management is able to absorb the shocks.
Hmm.
Because when you are in a civil industry
Business.
or a
And when
construction
you're in any
industry,
business, civil
yeah,
or anything, when you're in any business, ups and
correct.
downs are a part of
Exactly.
it.
And
Right.
rightly more so in the construction where so many uncertainties are still there. You are
Hmm.
dependent on external permissions, and many a times you want to add on the
Right.
TDR, and
Hmm.
that process is still very, very murky. You may not know whether you will get the additional area or not, and then you need to get your project going today. It's not as simple as saying a yes decision, because that additional floor will mean to additional cost of construction and
Hmm.
in a wafer thin margin, and you are spending huge amounts on brandings today, and so on
Hmm.
and so forth. So all of that is, many a times makes decision making process a little challenging. Having said that, I think the role of the senior management is to absorb those shocks from their management, but
Hmm.
down the line, at the operating level, you need to give that comfort, because every day, if you are changing your north to the person who is operating at the site, I mean, when I say north, I mean direction. Sorry, sometimes we would not
Understood.
like to use the site
Correct.
language.
Understood.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so every time if you are changing your instructions and if you are changing your directions for the person at site, at the grassroots level or even a middle engineer level, then I think the whole project organization gets affected adversely and only in the
Absolutely.
wrong interest of the client.
The whole workflow gets disturbed. Matlab, today we have a separate thought process, tomorrow we change on that same. Matlab, as per situation, you might have to do it at times, but if it becomes a regular process, that the
Correct.
communication from the management is not clear, the whole workflow
Correct.
goes for a toss.
Correct.
Because the
So
operational guys don't know how to move forward.
yes, and see, and what we also need to understand and appreciate is that once we have any contractor who reaches the site, he
Hmm.
comes with a lot of arrangements.
Hmm.
So
True.
suddenly telling him that stop for 7 days, then
Hmm.
start for 10 days, then again stop for 1 month. It's a complex. It becomes a complex process. He is not able to retain his manpower, obviously, because anybody who does good work will not be idle today. That's a known fact across whichever scenario. So
Absolutely.
I think understanding this maturity, having all this put across in a project plan, which with certain floats is a term which is used for cushions. So getting all this in place, I think these should be the areas that can be put across to the top level. And while doing this, all of these are typically very, very standard things. But the maturity is how you are making your choices, and more
Hmm.
importantly, how you are adhering to them. So,
That's pretty good. Hmm.
yes, and that's about building in the discipline, right?
Yeah, but the
So,
maintaining discipline, strategies, communication is all which has to come from the top management if the down team has to work.
exactly, exactly. And I think all these areas, each of these individual areas are subjects in themselves. And of course, depending from company to company, scenario to scenario, all of these can always be customized, having their inputs and their involvement, because that is where the whole thing becomes effective.
Absolutely. Great. So, Paman sir, this takes me to my last question. Post that, we can open the stage for any questions.
Yeah,
With increasing demand for timely projects delivery in real estate sector, how are the developers manage their time pressure and what strategies are employed to mitigate delays and maintain quality? Time, cost, and quality. Everything has to be
sure.
maintained.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So, a very valid point in today's scenario. I would just like to touch base this. Let's say today, if you see the players in the real estate segment, perhaps I would say they would be of about four types.
Hmm.
One is the big brands that have come in the market right now, who perhaps like maybe Mahindras, Godrej, and so on and so forth, Tata Realty, and so on and so forth. So these are the guys who are biggies who have come in the market in real estate segment because of the opportunities that they offer. But the advantage is that they have come in from a manufacturing segment.
Hmm.
Okay, so there is a different level of discipline that they are bringing in, perhaps in a dirty game. So if I may say it that way. So in an unorganized sector. So that is level one. Level, perhaps the next level or the next level of companies would be those brands who have been, let's say, pan geographics, pan India, and so on and so forth. They have been into real estate construction only, but they have delivered good projects and they have
Hmm.
made a name for themselves in the market.
True.
Third, I would say would be the local brands. So those who are in perhaps tier two cities and so on and so forth, but they have remained in that geographical domain. So they understand the local dynamics very well.
Hmm.
And the last who would be very, very minuscule, but of course their contribution would equally be on a smaller scale. But nevertheless, they are existing and they are, let's say, individual entities who are operating as developers due to various reasons. They may have the land bank, they may have the money, and so on and so on. Now, across these four segments, if you see, with the amount of with the amount of developments that have come in, with the amount of regulations that have come in, RERA becoming active, and so on and so forth. The end consumer being very, very knowledgeable today,
Hmm.
gone are those days where the builder would, perhaps just give a clean presentation and the customer would most of the times take a yes or no based on variety of requirements without asking too many technical questions.
True.
Today's Thanks to the internet, today's consumer is well informed. He understands law to the extent of his agreements and so on and so forth. So, in all these scenarios, when it comes to project timely deliveries
Hmm.
and it comes to the, say, the first level of building entrance, what we find is they have understood, thanks to their manufacturing background, they have understood all that it takes to run a project professionally. Okay, they
Very
may
important.
not have, yeah,
Yeah.
they may not have 100 list where they have said we have implemented this, but they definitely, as on date, have a project of 8 to 10 on their list where they
Hmm.
have said that we have implemented all of these in these projects, and over the projects we have only improvised them.
Hmm. Execution capability is there.
Yes,
Hmm.
and the advantage of all these projects, all these companies is, believe you me, their planning is in place.
Hmm.
Okay, so because once, see, the planning is the crux. That is the time where you can deviate many, many things. Once you have done that, given the question and handed it over to the execution, according to me, it is like you have put a non-return wall. You have crossed the point of no return.
True.
Then so when it comes to such projects, okay, again, we are also now doing projects which are about 100 stories. I mean, 60
Hmm.
is the norm in any metropolitan city. 60 stories has become very, very normal. Average, I would say, is 80 stories, that is 240 meters. And of course, in certain projects, people have touched 300 meters as well, that is 100 stories.
Hmm.
So again, when you are working at such large heights, maintaining the verticality of the building and so on and so forth, and construction safety issues, operational issues are equally challenging. Having said all this, uh, if you are now, I mean, if you would say, what are these guys doing to ensure that they deliver time, cost, quality? I think they are starting this process from their drawing boards when they make choice of technology in the first place.
Hmm.
Okay, because so basically, conventional system, if you go, let's say a slab to slab cycle, could be anywhere between 18 to 21 days, depending on what is the area of the slab.
Hmm.
So what I mean is, आपका एक particular slab, उसमें every 21 days or 18 days you will do concreting, which means after the slab has been concreted, you will have columns, then you will have beams and the next level of slab. So that slab cycle typically in a conventional method takes about 18 to 21 days into common average scenario. Today, if you are required to, and that is again RCC, the reinforced concrete stage, is one of the activities where if you, it's called a critical activity, which means if you delay 10 days in that activity, your project is sure shot
Your
going to be
project
pending.
is absolutely.
Correct.
Hmm.
There is
So
no cushion that is
prioritizing.
available.
Hmm.
Correct. So whenever such companies start their projects, they obviously go to the drawing board, identify what are the new technologies that you can do for this. Perhaps
Hmm.
something like a slip form, perhaps something like my one, or something where you can use the whole formwork which moves in, from the bottom to the top. You don't have to dismantle everything, take it to the next floor, and then reassemble everything, wherein you can save time. And by doing this, a slab cycle can be brought down to anywhere between 5 to 7 days. Okay. So this is
Hmm.
about you are saving 12 to 13 days per cycle. And imagine that multiplied by number of slabs that are existing. So also, of course, by doing this, the disadvantages you will have in this is that it will be applicable for projects where you are using these formworks for many, many repetitions because the cost of the formwork is very high. At the same time, you are also introducing concrete members like columns, which are, we call it shear columns, which are 1 meter or 1.5 meter long. So there are many, many restrictions for the people who are staying there that you can't nail here and so on and so forth. But then, of course, that's the pros and cons. So multiple technologies you may want to use. If you are using these technologies for the first time, then automatically you need to set your teams to reach those goals in a stage by stage manner.
To
So now
learn. Absolutely.
learn.
So
Correct.
introducing technology is one thing, but
Correct.
aligning team to use that technology is another task.
Correct. So
Hmm.
obviously giving in that right time frame allocation wherein you are actually hand holding your team, getting the technology in place,
Hmm.
and then allowing them to leverage onto it, right? So that is one of the things that is normally done for saving of time. Automatically, quality comes along with it. What are the controls that you're putting in across to ensure that quality is realized in terms of the checklists,
Right.
in terms of ensuring that normally what we do is, of course, it's a very standard project management process. What we do is, if there is any activity which is to be done at this stage, there is a pre-activity checklist, there is a post-activity checklist. So
Hmm.
how of that, what are the activities involved there? How have those been adhered to, checked, managed, documented, and realized?
Hmm.
Most importantly, we need to understand and appreciate that any of these activities costs money. And
And
the
yes,
purpose,
we are not overboarding the cost. That's
correct,
important.
correct.
Right.
So fine tuning that and realizing it to ensure the end goal. I think that
Hmm.
is most important. So that is where the level one players have an advantage. The level two players are understanding this. They, of course, see, because the advantage with level one is that they have a very strong balance sheet
Hmm.
and
True.
cash flow management is not an issue for them.
हाँ मतलब risk taking appetite is better.
Correct. And
Hmm.
that conventional model is gone where a builder would earlier get 44 flats in place and he would be dependent on, sale of those and money coming in from them
Hmm.
and cash flow, fund flow. वो जमाना गया. So while it may be true for a few real estate developers today, the clients do not understand and acknowledge it, neither that they want to,
Hmm.
given the costs that are prevailing in the market. So in all these aspects, I think understanding how the finance flows, thereby choosing the right choosing the right construction technique, choosing the right
Quality.
implementation controls.
Yeah.
That level two is now understanding.
True.
Level three, who are local players, of course, now are competing with level one and level two. Uh, they don't have a very huge cost advantage because uh, it all depends. I mean, level one is giving amazing facilities and amazing amenities.
Hmm.
So also level two is latching on to them. So level three can't be left apart. So in
He
all
has to
these
match the same
scenarios,
standards.
they have to be somewhere close by.
हाँ मतलब
And
आप अगर वो 100 है तो आपको 80 तक तो मेंटेन करना पड़ेगा टू बी विजिबल इन द मार्केट
correct.
राइट
And while you are at that 80, perhaps cost-wise you should be at 60 or 65 only, then you will have a longevity. Otherwise, then
एब्सोल्युटली
somebody might as well go to level one and level two.
ट्रू वेरी ट्रू
You know, So that has made them also equally reorganize their whole business, look into their own models of how they can give additional, I mean, value engineering, added value at the same cost, or perhaps if you can master them as an added value at reduced cost. अगर वो कर सकते हैं तो they stand a better chance of leveraging in the market. And I think all of these are opportunities for them.
100%. मतलब I'm totally sync with them. If level three can manage 80% of what the 100% guy is doing at a competitive cost, I think they have a huge market to cover. So I
Correct.
think very impressive and very interesting discussion, sir. I would leave the desk open for some question and answer in case anybody has any questions. Probably we can take it up with you.
So
So, Secretariat, any questions that you have right now or anything in the chat box? I don't think anything is in the chat box right now. In case anybody from the attendees has any questions, so Pavan sir can take it up. Or probably, I can share the email ID and his number. In case there is
sure.
any question from anyone, we will be more than happy to come back to you on that.
Absolutely. I'll be equally happy to address all the questions that may be there for your team. And I think it was a great opportunity. I enjoyed
Absolutely,
equally.
sir. I think very interesting discussion. So everybody talks about real estate as a sector, but the detailing which you have given on the project management side, what are the various challenges which a developer faces, and training as an aspect becomes very, very important for this sector because whatever we say and do, I think it's still one of the most unorganized sector today, but I think with the new technologies which are coming in and with training added to that, I'm sure, very soon we will also be able to compare ourselves to the manufacturing sector where,
Correct.
things will be more organized. Thank
Correct.
you so much,
That is,
sir. Thank you for your time. I think Chitra
thank
has
you.
a question. She's just raised her hand. So
Sure.
Chitra, to briefly introduce her, she's basically an architect herself and
Okay.
been coming in from a developer's profile. So she has been also coming in doing a lot of projects herself. Go ahead,
Wonderful.
Chitra. Chitra, we can't hear you. Secretary, I think, do you need to unmute Chitra? Because I can't hear her. She has some question, but we're not able to hear her.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, very
Yes,
much.
yes.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, Sonal, wonderful session. And thanks, Mr. Jainpur. This was, though a lot of it was very familiar, but I understand that coming from a project management perspective, um, definitely you covered, I think, all the points and all the check boxes. So it's like you gave a checklist of, how a project runs and what has to be done at various stages. So I think I also found it very interesting. But only one point I wanted to just share is
Sure.
not really a question. But see, I also I teach, and this is what we tell the students at the master's level, where we expect some of them would be going and working in the real estate sector, maybe with builders, or turn into developers and builders, maybe at some stage.
Right.
Uh, so we always tell them that, listen, a project is not just because most of them are from an architecture background. So don't look at it from an architecture perspective. And so a project is something much, much larger. And there are a lot of decisions which need to be taken even prior to the design stage. And as you mentioned, it's technologies, you're looking at what really the project has to be, if it is a net zero, if it's a green, sustainable, which are all now taken for granted. Now we presume
Absolutely.
that those are your basics now. There's no
Correct.
question about it. And
Correct.
we kind of come of a circle. When I studied architecture, climatology was a very, very important subject that we learned, where
Correct.
most of the focus used to be local, use local materials, design for the climate, design for the flora and fauna that's available. Try to keep everything as local as possible.
Correct.
And that was the crux of the whole subject, and that was how I think most of our old buildings, even if you look at buildings that were designed in Lutyens Delhi or any of the in, what do you say, institutional buildings in Delhi,
Correct.
which was designed in the early in the 50s, 60s, 70s, were all, I think, totally geared up to the climate of the city, which is why even today they are functioning.
Correct. And
And
functioning
then
better
this full
And
circle,
and
functioning
optimally.
better.
starting
And
from
functioning
there,
better.
then went to kind of aping the West and putting in a whole lot of glazing, structural glazing, etc. And then coming back now, everybody's turning to local technologies, and then you want to reduce your heat gain, etc. So we are realizing that, our older designs were good. I mean, there was nothing wrong with them, that we had to ape the West, and then we're coming back. But well, that's what now I think a lot of architects are now designing for the Indian context. Um, so we normally tell the students that most important person in a project is the project
He's
management.
the project manager. Totally sing.
So
Matlab,
you, so we
he
always
has
tell
to manage the cost, he has to manage the quality, he has to manage the time.
yeah. And so basically, a project which is large begins with you know um, actually a project, what do you call, like a briefing, and the brief that has to be translated from what the client wants to an executable format, which is where the project management team actually starts. So it's a project formulation, is what we call our projects. They are not no more just pure architecture design that you just design the building, but you have to ensure that you are able to sell, you are able to sell, make it at the right cost, sell it at the right cost, and make what is required for the market. So that's where the project management team is really important, that they cover all these functions. So design is one aspect, but there are so many other aspects which are equally important. But there are, today, I think most architects are taking in those technologies right at the design stage. So
Yes.
you will see that a lot of designs only have, let us say, a 100 wall or 110 wall, because they've already presumed that the construction is going to be with the Mevan system. So
Yeah.
they are not no longer designing for 230, typical masonry 9 inches wall. So you already have built in all that, and that's how your design appears neater, cleaner, and they are able to put in a lot of thinking at the design stage itself. So it is not that I don't think that would be a case unless somebody decides to change track. But most often, I think bigger projects, would start getting all these right in the first place, because the cost implication is also quite high. Space
Correct.
implication is high. So I think that is where it's not that people start thinking later, but most of them start doing all this right in the first stage. That it's all there in their design brief, that they know what they want. And if they've done one project, then they are able to replicate and better the same, in the next project. So every project is a learning, and they, come out better. And today, yes,
Yes.
projects are, great in terms of not just pure architecture, or not just responding to the market, but also fulfilling climate resilience. You're looking at sustainability, you're looking at net zero. Now everybody wants to do a better project than what they did earlier. So it's a very exciting time to me. If you ask me,
True.
for the real estate sector, I think
Absolutely.
it's a good time to do good work, and with a market which is also very, very, what do you say, uh, charged up. They also want to do something very good, buy a good product, not just, just say, okay, fine, I'm buying a house. A lot of them are buying very, very consciously. So they know what they want, and they say, okay, fine, we are willing to put in money into a project which is green, which is going to be sustainable, than
Sustainable.
just buy, which is probably cheaper by maybe a few hundred rupees per SFT lower in terms of cost, but they're willing to put in that extra money. So I think it's a
True.
good time. If you really ask me, it's a very exciting time for the real estate sector. Whichever kind of projects you're doing, hospitality, commercial, residential, and today it's all, everything is, mixed use is very, very
Correct.
common these days. So no one wants to design just for one land, kind of building use. Like, keep all these options, so it could be
And,
Correct.
parking plus residential plus commercial, hospitality also. So
and
Correct.
it's more
Correct.
of a
yeah,
township which is coming up now.
yeah,
Chitraji, I'll just
true.
take a quick minute. I think you have highlighted three very important points which I just want to touch base upon.
Hmm.
One is the no real estate developer would want to make changes by himself. Unfortunately, the
Mm,
problem is many a times his end user, if he changes or if he comes on board a little later due to whatever reasons, and that time if he gives in his inputs, that is the time where changes will come up because nobody. This is very
yeah,
basic,
that I
but
agree. True, true.
anybody would want to understand that I would not want to
Mm,
change going ahead. So that was point number one. Point number two is like this I mean, with respect to importance of project management, I would like to put it this way. I would say client, architect, and project management consultant are three legs of a tripod, and their
mm,
importance and their scope is is just compatible. The reason I'm saying this is I've had an opportunity to be working with equally number of architects as engineers, and that is the reason why I'm saying this is basically see the difference in mindset is when an engineer thinks, he thinks from a project process perspective. When an architect thinks,
mm,
he thinks from a creative perspective.
Design
So
perspective. Hmm.
correct. Honestly, if I ask you, if you being an architect, if I say please visualize a best design in a process way, most of the time it would never happen because ideas are always out of box and weird at the first place, right? So I would say that importance of architect equally remains. Importance of the client in terms of his role of giving a project brief and to the best extent possible sticking on it remains so that the project management consultant can take over the basic parameters and then drive and align everybody towards the end goal. That was point number two. And point number three is per se, of course, glass facades, etc., have been more applicable to the West and so on and so forth. Having said all of that, I think, according to me, what is the disconnect is the sheer replication in their numbers. Because no technology or no solution is right or wrong by itself. If that is controlled, see what happens is obviously, I'm sure you will appreciate when you go for high rise and the higher number of stories, obviously dead weight of the structure comes into picture, which is why
Hmm.
you need to perhaps balance the weight with the alternative technologies and the members. So while that is understood and appreciable, I think too many glass buildings in the adjoining vicinity without the right use of glass, because today glass as an element has also matured. than what it was earlier. I think that could lead to certain operational problems. So thanks for touching base all of these
Mhm.
3 points, and my point is on the same.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks, Sonal,
Just
again.
the last question. Thank you so much, Chitra. So, just a last question from one of the attendees here. As
Yeah,
we know, AI is completely changing the workflow in many industries.
yes,
According to you, how can we be implementing this AI in real estate, in
sure.
construction industry?
Yes. See, between a normal construction project and an I
Hmm.
think today we have an element called as BIM, which is Building Information Modeling.
Hmm.
Uh, given the amount of given the amount of variability in parameters that are existing and AI, my my comment here would be, if at all you are using AI, you should be able to decipher from the results of AI,
Hmm.
because AI in itself is not yet streamlined and stabilized across various segments,
True.
right? So today we do a lot of simulations in variety of softwares. Okay, even if you want to decide what is the energy consumption that may happen for a building all across various times of the day and so on and so forth. So we have something called as energy model simulation. Now the point is, while we may be using each of these individual softwares for their expertise, I feel a certain amount of correlation and coordination is required between their results before you directly implement their outcomes. Otherwise, that can be misleading.
Hmm.
So while of course AI has a lot of advantages, we also have used AI to a certain extent in terms of design and so on and so forth. But I think, of course, at this stage, the maturity will lie as to how you can decipher and take the outputs of AI to fine tune to what the
Hmm.
current scenarios are, than blindly following the output.
Very true. I think, understanding how is it going to impact and without the human touch, anyway, AI does not work. So that human
Correct,
touch has to be there. The AI as a technology can only provide you support as such. So basic
correct,
strategy till the time it's implemented along with AI would not help much out.
correct, correct.
Right, sir. Just a last question. I'm sorry, these questions have started coming at the
No
last minute.
problem.
So,
Sure.
how receptive will be the built environment industry to the new technologies such as AI and 3D printing, considering its price sensitive nature?
Sure. So, an important aspect which has been highlighted, I'm thankful to the well-informed team who is a part of the audience. Thank you so much. See, when we come to things like 3D printing, of course, today 3D printing also has, I would say, has taken off relatively well. So while
Hmm.
we know that the first ground floor level uh, structure, I think in Bangalore, as a post office took off, of late we have also heard that it is being a structure of 3 stories is being planned for implementation. Of course, the amount of challenges in the structure will be kept to a minimal, understanding how 3D printing technology works, blah, blah, blah. So having said all that, uh, I would say this is going to be a transition phase where actually we are also implementing new tools and techniques.
Hmm.
The actual uh, habitation in a 3D printed building. Okay, though we understand that there will be a cavity when you have certain walls for the conduits to pass and so on and so forth. I think the overall product which is getting delivered using 3D printing, its experience over a period of say 1 or 2 years across seasons, and of course the changes and the dynamism that it can take in terms of design. I think
Hmm.
these 3 things put together will determine whether this will be a long-term solution or not.
True. I think very well said, sir. So thank you so much. I think we will close this session today, and apologies for a stretched out one. So,
No
but
problem.
we really had a very interesting session, and really appreciate all your thoughts. I will share your email ID also within the group in case anybody has further questions. So they will definitely reach out to you. Thank you once again for all your time, sir.
Sure.
Thank
Happy
you.
to help always. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye.
Sure.
Bye-bye.